She walked into that Madison Avenue boutique with 3 months of hard-earned savings and a heart full of hope. Zariah Mitchell, elegant, poised, and a master of languages, just wanted to buy a piece of sun-drenched gold to mark a personal milestone. But the moment the jeweler's eyes raked over her, his professional mask curdled. "Gold simply doesn't suit your complexion," he whispered, as if he were doing her a favor, as if her blackness was a fashion faux pas he was paid to correct. He tried to push her toward the affordable silver, toward the shadows, toward anywhere that kept her in what he deemed her rightful place. Zariah stood there, feeling that familiar, suffocating burn of humiliation, the kind of rage she'd spent a lifetime learning to swallow. But what that jeweler didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the man Zariah was waiting for was about to step through those glass doors. A man whose tattoos told stories of blood and loyalty, a Korean mafia boss in a suit that cost more than the store's monthly rent. What Choi Hyunwoo did next didn't just bankrupt a bigot, it sparked a legacy of empowerment that would echo through the streets of New York for generations. Before we dive into the moment the vault was cleared, comment below with your city and time. If you believe that respect isn't a privilege but a right, hit that subscribe button and join our community. The bell above the door chimed a silver, mocking note as Zariah Mitchell stepped into the hushed sanctuary of Lelite Jewelry. The boutique felt less like a store and more like a cathedral dedicated to wealth. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cedarwood, polished marble, and that specific, heavy silence that tells you exactly how much you don't belong. Zariah adjusted the strap of her bag, her fingers brushing the envelope of cash she'd meticulously tucked away. She had skipped meals, taken late-night translation gigs, and worked until her eyes blurred for this moment. To the jeweler standing behind the velvet-lined counter, she was just a distraction in a space reserved for old money. He performed a 2-second calculation, the poverty scan, and decided she wasn't worth the air he breathed. "May I help you find something in the discounted silver section?" he asked, his voice dripping with Arctic condescension. Zariah took a breath, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I'm looking for the 24-karat gold filigree necklace. The one in the window." The jeweler's lip curled. He didn't just see a customer, he saw a challenge to his status quo. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, venomous hiss. "My dear, I speak as a professional when I say, gold simply doesn't suit people like you. It's far too loud against your skin. Perhaps a dull bronze?" In that moment, the temperature in the room didn't just drop, it froze. Because behind Zariah, the heavy front door swung open, and the gravity of the room shifted toward the man with the dragon inked onto his throat. The heavy glass door of Lelite Jewelry didn't just open, it exhaled. As Zariah Mitchell stepped inside, the frantic, soot-stained roar of Madison Avenue was instantly replaced by a silence so thick it felt pressurized. The air here tasted of expensive things, aged cedarwood, the metallic tang of polished platinum, and a floral perfume that smelled like inheritance and secrets. Zariah smoothed the front of her cream-colored coat, her fingers momentarily grazing the leather wallet tucked deep into her pocket. Inside that wallet was the physical manifestation of 90 days of sacrifice. It was the no she had said to every takeout meal, the yes she had said to every grueling, midnight translation project that left her eyes burning under a desk lamp. It was 3 months of discipline, all for the sake of a singular, golden dream. She looked at the velvet-lined displays, her heart hammering a soft, expectant rhythm against her ribs. To anyone else, the 24-karat filigree necklace in the center pedestal was just an accessory, but to Zariah, it was a trophy. It was a bridge between the woman she was, the one who worked in the shadows of other people's words, and the woman she was becoming. She wanted to feel the weight of that gold against her skin, a warm, permanent reminder that she was finally allowed to occupy spaces of beauty. She approached the counter, her posture regal, her expression carefully neutral to hide the flutter of excitement in her stomach. The store was a cathedral of old money, where the marble floors were polished to a mirror finish that seemed to track every footstep. Zariah noticed her reflection in a glass case, her dark skin stood out in sharp, vibrant contrast against the muted beige and gold of the interior. She looked elegant, she looked prepared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged in the light. Behind the mahogany counter, a man with silver hair and spectacles that perched like a predator on his nose was adjusting a display. He didn't look up immediately. He let the silence stretch, a subtle power play designed to make the uninitiated feel small. Zaraya didn't falter. She waited, her hand resting near the savings that represented her freedom. She was ready to claim her prize, unaware that the Madison Avenue dream was about to collide with a century of cold, calculated prejudice. The silver-haired man finally straightened, his movements slow and deliberate, as if the very act of acknowledging a presence was a gift he bestowed sparingly. He didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he adjusted his spectacles and turned his gaze toward Zaraya, performing what she instinctively recognized as the 2-second calculation. It was a ritual of the elite, a cold, clinical scan that moved from the brand of her shoes to the stitching of her coat, finally settling on the way she held her shoulders. In those 2 seconds, he didn't see the thousands of words she had translated for global summits or the quiet dignity of a woman who had earned her place. He saw a ledger that didn't add up. He saw a trespasser. To him, the math was simple: her skin was too dark, her presence was too new, and the 3 months of labor hidden in her wallet was invisible compared to the generational wealth he was used to serving. The silence in the boutique grew teeth. The jeweler leaned forward, resting his manicured hands on the glass display case as if to shield the diamonds beneath from her very breath. His expression didn't shift into a smile, it settled into a look of weary tolerance, the kind one might offer a child who had wandered into a restricted area. "I believe you've mistaken our entrance for the gallery next door," he said, his voice a smooth, icy drawl that made the heated room feel suddenly drafty. "This is Lelite. We operate by appointment for our established clientele." Zaraya felt the first prickle of the familiar burn, the heat rising in her neck that she had spent years training herself to douse with ice. "I don't have an appointment," she said, her voice steady and melodic, "but I'm here to purchase the 24-carat filigree necklace from the window. I've been admiring it for some time." The jeweler's eyes flickered toward the window and then back to her, his pupils narrowing. A small, mocking twitch pulled at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, but a dismissal. He didn't reach for the keys. He didn't invite her to sit. Instead, he let out a short, nasal sigh, the sound of a man burdened by the audacity of the unqualified. "That piece is a heritage design," he replied, his tone dripping with a condescension so thick it was almost tactile. "It requires a certain appreciation for the craft. And, of course, a certain level of financial commitment that usually begins with a long-standing line of credit." He paused, his gaze raking over her once more with blatant disdain. "I'm sure you understand. Perhaps there is a boutique in the mall that would better suit your current needs?" Zaraya felt the air in the boutique thin, the weight of the jeweler's gaze becoming a physical pressure. She did not look away. Instead, she reached into her bag and produced the envelope, the crisp edges of the bills a silent testament to her resolve. "I have the funds," she said, her voice a calm anchor in the rising sea of his arrogance. "I would like to see the necklace." The jeweler didn't even look at the envelope. He didn't have to. His mind was a vault of ancient, ugly certainties that no amount of legal tender could unlock. He took a slow step back, shaking his head with a look of feigned, tragic regret. It was the expression of a man performing a mercy, masking a blow as a piece of professional wisdom. "It isn't merely a matter of the price, Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt like a serrated blade. "In this industry, we pride ourselves on aesthetic harmony. We don't just sell metal, we sell a look. And I must be honest with you, as someone who has spent 40 years styling the world's most beautiful women." He leaned over the counter, his eyes cold and clinical. Gold is a jealous metal. It demands a certain paleness to truly shine. Against your specific skin tone, it would look gaudy. Cheap. It would clash in a way that would be quite embarrassing for you." Zaraya felt a sharp, ringing silence in her ears. The familiar burn she had felt moments ago was no longer a flicker, it was a forest fire. She looked at the gold filigree in the window, the way it caught the afternoon sun and turned it into liquid light. She knew it would look breathtaking against her deep, rich complexion. She knew it, and he knew it too. This wasn't a fashion critique, it was a marking of territory. I am recommending our silver collection, the jeweler continued, gesturing vaguely toward a shadowed corner of the store where the cheaper, utilitarian pieces were housed. Or perhaps the bronze. They are much more subdued. They won't draw the kind of attention that gold would on you. It's for your own benefit, really. One must know their place in the spectrum of luxury. He stood back, crossing his arms with a look of smug finality, waiting for her to shrink, waiting for her to apologize for ever dreaming of the sun. But as Zaraya opened her mouth to speak, the heavy brass handle of the front door turned, and the very atmosphere of the room began to vibrate with an approaching storm. The bell above the door didn't just chime this time, it seemed to strike a warning note that resonated through the floorboards. The vacuum of the boutique silence was punctured by the heavy, rhythmic thud of leather boots, a sound that carried a different kind of authority than the soft tiptoe of the Madison Avenue elite. The air, once stagnant with the jeweler's ego, suddenly sharpened, turning electric and cold. Choi Hyun-woo stepped into the light, and the very gravity of the room seemed to tilt toward him. He was a silhouette of sharp lines and darker intentions, wrapped in a charcoal wool suit that fit him like a second skin, a garment that whispered of bespoke tailors and backroom deals. But it wasn't the price of the fabric that caused the jeweler's breath to hitch in his throat, it was the ink. Rising from the pristine white collar of Hyun-woo's shirt was the jagged tail of a dragon, its dark scales winding up his neck and disappearing behind his ear, a permanent mark of a life lived outside the boundaries of polite society. He didn't look at the displays. He didn't look at the chandelier. His eyes, dark and predatory, were fixed solely on Zaraya. He moved through the space with the casual grace of a wolf entering a sheepfold, his presence so immense that the ornate mahogany counters suddenly looked like dollhouse furniture. Behind him, the glass door remained held open by a man in a silent black suit, while two others stood like granite pillars just outside, their eyes scanning the street with a lethality that made passers-by quicken their pace. The jeweler, who moments ago had been a giant in his own small kingdom, seemed to physically shrink. His silver hair caught the light as he began to tremble, his hand instinctively fluttering to his throat. He recognized power when it walked into a room, but this wasn't the power of a long-standing line of credit. This was the power of a man who could buy the street, the store, and the silence of everyone in it. Hyun-woo came to a halt beside Zaraya, not touching her yet, but standing close enough that his warmth acted as a shield against the jeweler's arctic disdain. He didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at the jeweler, a long, terrifyingly empty stare that stripped the man of his titles and his spectacles. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Hyun-woo reached out and placed a hand on the small of Zaraya's back. He felt the tension in her frame, the lingering vibration of the insult she had just endured. "Zaraya," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that seemed to vibrate in the very glass of the display cases. "You've been here a long time. Is there a problem with the service?" The silence that followed Hyun-woo's question was heavy, like the moments before a landslide. Zaraya didn't answer immediately. She was a woman of quiet dignity, but the jeweler's words had been a slap that left no physical mark, only a searing, invisible heat. When she finally looked up at Hyun-woo, her eyes weren't wet with tears, they were bright with the familiar burn of a woman who had been told, once again, that her presence was a blemish on someone else's perfection. Hyun-woo saw it instantly. He didn't need a translation for the tight set of her jaw or the way she was holding the envelope of her hard-earned savings like a shield. He leaned in closer, his dark eyes searching hers until he found the spark of humiliation the jeweler had tried to fan into an extinguished flame. In that look, the cold, calculated dark gratification that defined his world began to stir. He turned his gaze toward the jeweler, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. "I asked a question," Hyun-woo repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. The jeweler's face had drained of all its arctic condescension, replaced by a gray, waxen mask of terror. I was merely offering professional guidance, sir," he stammered, his hands shaking so violently they rattled against the mahogany counter. "Aesthetic advice, regarding the 24-carat filigree. I suggested that perhaps, silver." You suggested, Hyunwoo interrupted, his tone as sharp as a razor, that the sun doesn't belong on her skin because you find the light too blinding. He stepped toward the counter, his large, tattooed hand spreading flat against the glass. The jeweler flinched, expecting the surface to shatter. You looked at her and saw a customer you could diminish. I look at her and see the only person in this room worth the air she breathes. He didn't raise his voice, but the gravity of his presence seemed to squeeze the walls of the boutique inward. Open the vault, Hyunwoo commanded. The jeweler blinked, his mouth hanging open. Sir? The vault is for private viewings only, by. Open. The vault. Hyunwoo leaned over the counter, the dragon on his neck appearing to writhe as his muscles tensed. Everything. Every piece of gold, every stone, every heritage design you think is too good for her. I want to see the inventory you've spent 90 years guarding. Because before the sun sets today, I am going to make sure you never have to worry about aesthetic harmony in this building ever again. The jeweler's legs gave way, his knees hitting the plush carpet with a muffled thud as he scrambled to obey. With trembling fingers, he punched the code into the heavy steel door behind the counter. The vault hissed open, revealing a treasure trove of light, tiers of gold, cascades of diamonds, and emeralds that glowed like prehistoric ice. The old money atmosphere that had once felt so oppressive now felt like a funeral shroud. Hyunwoo didn't even look at the displays. His eyes remained fixed on the jeweler's crumbling composure. He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal suit and withdrew a card. It wasn't plastic, it was a heavy, matte black slab of anodized titanium, the Centurion card. He tossed it onto the glass counter with a sharp clack that echoed like a gavel. Everything, Hyunwoo said, his voice a cold, terrifying monotone. The inventory in the vault, the pieces in the windows, the loose stones in the back. Run the card for the entire stock. I believe your insurance valuation sits at roughly $4 million. Charge it. The jeweler stared at the black card as if it were a live grenade. Sir. The system might not even. Make it work, Hyunwoo snapped. While the man's shaking hands fumbled with the terminal, Hyunwoo pulled a sleek, encrypted phone from his pocket. He didn't look away from the jeweler as the call connected. Junho. Find out who holds the lease for this specific corner of Madison Avenue. I don't care if it's a holding company or a private trust. Offer them double the market value for the building. If they refuse, buy the holding company. He paused, a predatory smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, the dark gratification of a man who played with cities like they were chessboards. And Junho? I want the eviction papers for the current tenant drafted within the hour. Standard clause for reputational damage to the property. This space is under new management. The credit card machine let out a long, high-pitched beep, printing a receipt that trailed down toward the floor like a white flag of surrender. The jeweler looked at the paper, then at the black card, and finally at Zaraya. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. In 10 minutes, he had lost the inventory, the business, and the very ground beneath his feet. He had tried to put a woman in her place, only to find he no longer had a place of his own. Hyunwoo picked up the card and turned back to Zaraya, his expression softening into something almost tender. It's all yours, Zaraya. Every ounce of gold in this building. Now, tell me, do you want to wear it, or should we just burn the history of this place to the ground? The jeweler didn't just collapse, he seemed to deflate, his spine curving as if the weight of the very ceiling was finally pressing down on him. He slid from his stool, his knees hitting the marble floor with a hollow, pathetic thud that echoed through the rows of silent, glittering displays. His spectacles, the ones he had peered through with such arctic condescension, slipped to the tip of his nose, mirroring the total loss of his focus. 90 years. The number rang in his head like a funeral bell. His grandfather had survived the Great Depression to lay the first stone of this boutique. His father had weathered recessions and wars to keep the Lelite name synonymous with the untouchable heights of Madison Avenue. He had been a steward of a legacy built on the exclusion of others, a gatekeeper who mistook his own cruelty for professionalism. Now, in a heartbeat of arrogant miscalculation, He had watched that nearly century-long history dissolve into a single slip of thermal paper. He looked at the receipt trailing from the terminal, then at the black-suited men standing at the door like grim reapers. The air in the boutique, once tasting of cedarwood and old money, now felt like ash. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that he wouldn't just be closing for the day, he would be packing his belongings under the watchful eyes of Choi Hyun-woo's legal team. The heritage designs he had guarded so viciously no longer belonged to his family's lineage, they belonged to the woman he had tried to humiliate. "Please," he wheezed, his voice a ragged shadow of its former icy drawl. He looked up at Zariah, his eyes wide and watery, searching for a mercy he had never once offered. "This boutique, it's my family's life. It's been here since 1936. You can't just end it like this." The silence that met his plea was colder than any dismissal he had ever delivered. Zariah looked down at him, her expression unreadable. She saw a man who wasn't mourning a loss of art or beauty, but a loss of the power to make others feel small. The familiar burn in her chest had settled into a steady, glowing heat, not of revenge, but of a profound, shifting clarity. Hyun-woo stood beside her, his hand still a warm, grounding weight on her back. He didn't look at the jeweler with hatred, he looked at him with the clinical indifference one might show a broken piece of furniture. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleared landscape, and for the first time in 90 years, the silence in the boutique belonged to someone who wasn't afraid to breathe. The jeweler's eyes were fixed on Hyun-woo's hand, which hovered over a sleek, silver burner phone, the final instrument of his destruction. One word from the man with the dragon on his neck, and the demolition crews would be scheduled, the inventory liquidated into anonymous bars of scrap metal, and the very memory of Lelite ground into the Manhattan pavement. The air in the room was thick with the scent of a financial apocalypse, a dark gratification that tasted like iron and salt. Hyun-woo looked at Zariah, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Just say the word, and I'll have the furnace hot by midnight," he murmured, his voice a low vibration of protective rage. "We'll melt it all down. Every gold thread, every heritage link. We'll turn his 90 years of pride into a puddle of nothing." Zariah looked at the jeweler, still trembling on his knees, and then at the vault overflowing with $4 million of captured sunshine. For a heartbeat, the temptation was a roar in her ears. She could watch it burn. She could watch the arrogance leave this man's eyes forever as his life's work was reduced to industrial slag. It was the revenge she had dreamt of in every silent moment of humiliation she'd ever endured. But as she looked at her own reflection in the glass, regal, poised, and powerful, she realized that melting the gold would only prove the jeweler's lie. It would suggest that the beauty in the room was a weapon to be destroyed, rather than a right to be reclaimed. If she let Hyun-woo burn the world down, she would be losing her own moral agency to his shadows. "No," Zariah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a clear bell. Hyun-woo paused, his dark eyes narrowing in confusion. "No? Don't melt it," she said, stepping toward the center of the boutique. She looked the jeweler in the eye, not with spite, but with the cold clarity of a woman who had found her voice. "We aren't going to destroy this beauty. We're going to repurpose it. Every piece of gold in this vault is going to a charity auction. Every cent from the sale will fund a center for young black women, a place where they can learn that their worth isn't determined by the professional guidance of men like you." She turned back to Hyun-woo, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "We're not ending the legacy, Hyun-woo. We're changing the name on the door. This isn't going to be a graveyard for old money anymore. It's going to be a garden for new dreams." The jeweler let out a ragged sob of relief that quickly died in his throat as he realized that while his inventory wouldn't be ash, it would never be his again. He had been spared the fire, only to be erased by the light. The scaffolding came down as the morning sun hit Madison Avenue, revealing a name that glowed in brushed brass, the Zariah Mitchell Community Arts Center. The heavy, oppressive scent of cedarwood and secrets was gone, replaced by the fresh, sharp aroma of new paint and the vibrant energy of a dozen young women waiting to step inside. The boutique's silence had been permanently broken, replaced by the symphony of a neighborhood reclaiming its space. Zariah stood on the sidewalk, the brisk New York wind catching her coat, but she didn't feel the cold. Against the dark, elegant curve of her throat, the 24-karat gold filigree necklace finally rested. It didn't look gaudy or cheap. Under the unfiltered light of the city, the gold seemed to find its true purpose, reflecting off her skin in a warm, amber glow that made her look like she was fashioned from the sun itself. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore, it was a captured fragment of her own resilience. Beside her, Hyunwoo stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark overcoat, his presence no longer a storm, but a quiet, formidable anchor. He wasn't looking at the building or the crowd. He was looking only at her, his eyes filled with a pride that didn't require words. He had offered her a world of ashes, and she had built him a kingdom of light. As the ribbon was cut, a young girl from the first cohort of students looked up at Zaraya, her eyes wide with a sudden, shimmering recognition. She didn't see a woman who didn't belong. She saw a woman who had forced the world to change its definition of beauty. In that moment, the familiar burn that had lived in Zaraya's chest for years finally went cold, extinguished by a sense of belonging that no jeweler's scan could ever take away. Zaraya reached up, her fingers grazing the intricate gold links. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to swallow her rage or shrink her stature. She stood tall, her reflection in the glass doors no longer a trespasser in a house of old money, but the architect of a new era. She was no longer a shadow in the margins of other people's stories. She was the light, she was the gold, and for the first time on Madison Avenue, she was truly, finally seen.